Now we come to the session number 9 of this conference, a recapitulation, views from the rapporteurs. It is supposed that we shall listen to the summaries of the last sessions presented by the rapporteurs, and we shall have 4 presentations. But I want to divert your attention to the fact that we are in a very tight time. So I hope that in 1 hour we can end the whole session, because there are many other sessions, and I have these orders from my boss, Dr. Ismail Sarajuddin, or the boss of this conference. This particular session will present the reports of all the rapporteurs and crystallize the most important points that were highlighted in each panel discussion. We have 4 speakers: Professor Kazu Katahashi from Japan, and Dr. Muhammad Madkour, والدكتور سامح فوزي ومسز نهى عمر. نبدأ الآن بالمتحدث الأول. We shall present first speaker, Mr. Kazu Katahashi. I hope we don't exceed the limit of 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Takahashi from Tokyo, Japan. I reckon that the function of this session is to take stock of what has transpired in the last 2 days to prepare ourselves for the consideration of ways forward. And I present my remarks in that spirit. And I took note of somewhere around 50 to 60 pages for sessions 4 and 7. And therefore, I will try and condense these pages into just about less than 10, which I counted, because we have the problem shortage of time. And I will present the gist of what transpired in session 4 first, and then proceed to session 7. And at the end, I will present a few general remarks related to the discussions which took place in those 2 sessions, but at the same time to reflect on broader discussions of the last 2 days, which were very, very rich and learning experiences, perhaps for all of us. First, session 4, East European countries, particularly Southeast European countries, from which each year I have a number of talented graduate students in Tokyo. I have been informed about what's going on in those countries each year from young government officials of these countries. And it was very refreshing to listen to their leaders, former presidents, about what have been going on in those countries. Perhaps from among many very important sessions, this session may be most important in the sense that in history, where human beings have been struggling to come up with proper ways to govern ourselves, from ancient times onwards, 21st century may perhaps be remembered as the century of democracy. The current situation is that we have somewhere around 25 mature democracies in the world, where we have somewhere around 200 sovereign states. And among the international relations experts, there is a general consensus that in the course of the 21st century, the number of nation states may expand from 200, where we are now, to close to 300. And we have only 25 mature democracies. And relatively new democracies, we have somewhere around 50 now, which means that well over 200 countries will have to go through very, very difficult process of transition to democracies of one form or another in the course of this century. Then the experiences of the last 25 years of these East European countries may provide important lessons for a large number of the nation states in the world community in the rest of the 21st century. Now, I have noted several important points which provide basis for strengthening transition democracies into an increasingly mature democracies. And also I have noted a more number of points which need to be treated more carefully, and points of concern. And after presenting both aspects, I will try and pick up some of the points which would be useful in general terms. First, pro-democracy factors which emerged from the presentations and discussions in session 4 include, first of all, the importance of visions provided by leaders to assure the people where each of these new democracies would be heading for. Without it, it would be difficult for people to try and behave in a proper manner in difficult situations. Therefore, the vision of leaders is perhaps the most essential factor. The second is that this is the situation where bigotries and demagogues are rampant. And therefore, we have to try and find social forces which would counter demagogues. And some of the presidents pointed out important functions played by intellectual elites in that sort of situation. And that is a very important lesson. Very often, intellectuals are referred to in many ways in pejorative terms, but in transition democracies, intellectual elites have indeed played important positive roles. Third, transition democracies need some anchors for deepening the democratic process some of these East European countries found that anchor in the form of association and prospective association with EU. But perhaps it may not be only EU. In the broader terms, association with a very close networks of many international organizations may provide a set of anchors for democratization process. Fourth, always there are important issues of minorities because democracy where the decisions are made by majority votes for decision-making process, how to deal with then minorities is a key issue. And some of the presidents found a relative solution to this extremely difficult issue in the form of providing a measure of autonomy for minorities. And I picked up these 4 points, which would be very important for the rest of the 21st century as pro-democracy factors as presented by the presidents. I ignore that noise. I seem to have some more minutes. And then the warning signals, not only that noise, but warning signals for deepening democratic process in the transition democracies would include a number of points. First of all, a clear recognition that it is the vulnerability of democracy which has to be very clearly recognized. This is very different from mature democracies and vulnerability of democracies. This is the starting point of anything. And second, without economic underpinning for transition democracies, there's no way forward. People expect better living conditions, and transitions in most cases take place at a time when world and national economic situations are difficult. And transition itself provides a very poor economic environment. And putting it together, it is very difficult to match up with expectations of people in terms of economic performance. And this is the second challenge, vulnerability and economic performance. And this requires very difficult treatment. Third, authoritarian regimes have not resolved classic issues of any nation, such as religious battles, ethnic battles, and so forth. Authoritarian regimes have put lid on those difficult issues. And with democratization, all of these classic issues come out. And therefore, pluralistic political process makes it extremely difficult to deal with these classic issues. And then it is very easy for demagogues to find political issues to be active, and then the backlash to try and deal with those would provide then very fertile ground to establish oligarchies, to do something about those difficult issues. Then the challenge is how not to let forces of oligarchy prevail in the transition democracies. These are some of the major points which were provided by the former presidents of these transition economies, and I have noted many, many others, but because of shortage of time, I'll skip others. And I also skip general observation, and I will stick to reporting and recapping of what transpired. Now, at session 7, the challenges for political parties of the West. When I was young, I worked in the Secretary General's office of the OECD, and in the course of 1970s and 1980s, I struggled with difficult issues of overcoming the Cold War, recessions, and social problems, and education, all of these. How established democracies function or not function. And issues were provided by several speakers in that session. And I took note that there was a relative consensus that there's no alternative to multi-party democracy. The issue is how to constantly improve the performance of multi-party democracy. And now, in order to adjust ourselves to constantly new situations in the multi-party political democracy, we have to pin ourselves to some of the essentials. The starting point has to be the spirit of democracy, which is at the heart of any reform of democracy, as presented by one of the speakers in this session. And for that, then what are the elements of this spirit? At the heart of the spirit is the recognition of the dignity of man. And that is the essence of what has to be pursued in a constant reform process of mature democracies. And beyond that, there are a number of points which need to be highlighted, but because of shortage of time, I just would like to point out one element, that is that in order to improve mature democracies, the essence has to be to find ways to establish trust in the governance system. Trust is the essence of the whole thing. How to do it, that was very clearly pointed out. And in terms of danger signals which undermine mature democracies, there are so many, dwindling party membership and so forth, and since these are well known, and I wouldn't repeat those. And these are some of the points which were presented in sessions 4 and 7. And in general terms, I just would like to point out only one thing. That is that democracy is the best school of politics for leaders and for the people at large. And then how to make use of this opportunity, because from the ancient times, we have been experiencing different forms and different issues related democracies, and the learning process have to continue. And if we don't have educational forms to learn from experiences of democracies in different forms related to different experiences around the world. There are many forms of democracies which we have learned in the past 2 days, and learning from the experiences is the essence of democracy for political governance purposes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Kazu Hatashi, for this very precise presentation. الحقيقة أنا أتردد كثيرا أن أنبه أستاذا يابانيا للدقة أو للالتزام بالمواعيد، فيعني أنا كنت دائما متردد أن أقول له أي حاجة، لأن هذا هو شعوري نحو الدقة اليابانية المعتادة. يعني أشكره كثيرا على هذا التقديم. وننتقل الآن إلى المتحدث الثاني الدكتور محمد مدكور. أنا عايز أقول بس أن أنا يسعدني وشرفني أن أنا زميل محمد مدكور في نفس الدفعة في اقتصاد وعلوم سياسية، ويسعدني أن أقدمه في هذه اللحظة. تفضل يا محمد.
شكرا أسامة. A few words to our dear supporters in the translation, automatic translation up there. Unfortunately, due to the multilingual use within the various sessions that I will be reporting about, I will have sometimes to toggle between Arabic and English. So please help us along those lines. I will just start by saying that on the first day of the conference, my dear friends, mostly from Australia, asked me, what is the role of a rapporteur? What does being a rapporteur entail? And I said, well, when I was at the Jesuit, the translation, the proper translation of the term rapporteur is snitch, خباص يعني. And accordingly, it seems that that is the role Dr. Sarageddin has chosen to give me about those 2 sessions. I will try to abide by that command. But I will beg to take 3 of the 10 of the last 3 minutes that I am allowed to introduce a few comments on the things I will snitch about. The first session was the Middle East, North Africa region session that was in my personal evaluation, a very rich, live, fast session. Dr. Ayman al-Sayyad chaired it, and he made a set of ground rules. We are not here to make a comparison between autocracy and democracy. We will not discuss the issue whether democracy is needed or not. 2, in our discussions, we should address issues out of the box, not the conventional yakety-yak that's used in other conferences or previous meetings. Our conference should not be an exercise of madness or Byzantine discourse. And ultimately, we have the right to dream. Mrs. Amal Al-Muallimi from Saudi Arabia started by saying, and I will quote it in Arabic, المملكة حكم عليها دائما بأفكار سابقة التجهيز. And she pleaded not to push Saudi women, but to let them take their time to reach where they are trying to reach. And she gave a more specific example, asking the world not to call a abaya a sari. It is a abaya. It will not become a sari, but it might modernize into a better abaya. She spoke about the King Abdulaziz Center for National Dialogue, saying that, again, they had a set of ground rules to carry their discussions into that center. She gave us a very useful and interesting piece of information that it was composed of 70 individuals, 35 of them men and 35 women. She said that they would run a free discussion, however, always making sure to discuss the idea and not to denigrate the speaker. They would reach some recommendation that they would put forward to the king. And Sayyad interrupted her and he said, put forward to the king? And she said, yes, that's the way our society is functioning. In Saudi Arabia, she mentioned that change comes from the top and that opposition comes from the lower strata as opposed to other countries' behavior. And she also mentioned that they had some kind of a Senate, Majlis Shura, but that the bylaws that controlled the work of that Senate commanded that everybody agrees on any motion in order to put that motion forward and pass it on to the king. And needless to comment that very few motions are approved in unanimity. Again, Sayyad introduced the second speaker, Dr. Hussein Badrawi, with a lot of praise that I'm sure we all share, so I will not repeat them. Badrawi said that his always tried to start from a dream, and that dreaming and hoping and being an eternal optimist, like a very good friend of ours, is the quest of his life. He mentioned that he was actually reading a book called The Sapiens about the humanity track of development, and he gave a few very interesting examples on the fact that there were, at the very beginning, 6 types of humanoid, or human being, or Homo erectus. And he gave another funny example about the monkey and the banana, and whether anybody was able to convince the monkey that he should hand over the banana if promised a forest of bananas in another life. He then addressed some more substantial, less amusing topics, mentioning that what happened in 2011 was a revolution, and that all revolution address putting down a constitution in order to install a new one. And he made a point to say that when push came to shove and President Mubarak decided to change, he ordered a change out of the Constitution, an anti-constitutional change. He switched back to his baby, or the motto, the one issue that he devotes most of his time for, which is education. And he introduced or coined the term of disruptive innovation. And he mentioned that to be able to discuss democracy in the future, we have to implement futuristic means. He passed along his previous experience of trying to change a very rigid system from the inside and declared very flatly that he failed. Several anecdotes were mentioned during the discussion between Mr. Sayad and Dr. Badrawi. I will mention but one, which is the famous say of a late humoristic Egyptian writer who said that the communist system has fallen in Russia, yet, however, its agent in Egypt is still functioning. He addressed the issue of how, to what extent can we look at democracy from a wider perspective, and he made a point to say, not by the IT gimmicks earlier mentioned by Dr. Hisham al-Sharif, but rather from a more generic perspective. Mr. Salah Nasrawi took over about the very ticklish Iraqi issue. He mentioned the disaster that happened after importing, adopting, or trying to enforce an external system on Iraq, especially that the Iraqis themselves had not asked for a foreign party to impose on them or to feed them with such a system. You start blinking at 6. At 6 minutes. It's too early. The second issue he raised, he asked the question: was there a possibility to avoid the invasion? Was there a possibility to avoid chaos and the sequel of chaoses that took place in the area? He mentioned efforts to convince Saddam to step aside, and obviously the futility of such an exercise has been unfortunately proven. He raised a final question: is the real problem Sykes-Picot? Is this imposed hodgepodge of civilization in a given geographic area a reason for what we are addressing today in terms of problems between Kurds and Muslims, or Kurds and other ethnies? Then again, two issues were raised. The most important one of them, are we able today to make an historical trade, not between the strata of a given society, not between parties, not between political congregation, but a historical trade that need to be worked out and that would incorporate the various active elements of a given society. Mr. George Ishaq addressed الفئات المهمشة في المجتمع المصري. أشار أن المجتمع المصري قد خاصم السياسة. تحدث بالتفصيل عن تجربة كفاية في مصر وما تلاها من كفايات أخرى في بلاد عربية مثل لبنان وليبيا وتونس والأردن والسودان. وركز أن أهم إنجازين لكفاية كان اقتناص حق التظاهر واقتناص حق نقد رئيس الدولة. وطرح سؤال: هل تستمر الديمقراطية بشكلها البرلماني أم ننتقل إلى صيغة تشاركية participative؟ طرح فكرة لم تجد قبولا من المجموع بإيجاد مجلس آخر يضم النقابات ومنظمات المجتمع المدني، وخلصنا إلى أن المتحدثين طرحوا 4 بدائل للتغيير: من أعلى، من أسفل، من الخارج، ومن الداخل. تلا ذلك مجموعة من الأسئلة، سؤال للسيد رئيس الجلسة الحالية الدكتور أسامة، سؤال من مستر إيان، تعليقات من سعادة السفيرة فاطمة الزهراء، كلها بتدور حول هل نجحت ثورة 25 يناير؟ هل حالة الإنسان المصري أفضل الآن مما قبل تلك الثورة؟ كيف تتخذ القرارات في مصر؟ وطرح سعادة السفير محمد أنيس مجموعة من الملاحظات حول the paradigm that is prevailing today in our affairs. And he mentioned that this paradigm has changed from reform to resolution to stabilization, from democratization to the return of the state, from radicalization, unfortunately, to terrorism. Then he spoke about the functional aspects of democracy and that they are not institutional. And he raised the issue, how are big decisions taken? And finally, he mentioned democracy as part of the solution to regional problems, mentioning Syria, Libya, Yemen, and putting a focus on inclusiveness, decentralization, distribution of resources. I will unfortunately have to skip the detailed discussions that took place between the audience and the podium, and I will ask you kindly to allow me 3 or 4 specific remarks. A motion was put forward that Egyptian voters sell their vote out of poverty. I beg to differ. It's not out of poverty. It is not out of illiteracy. It is not out of ignorance. 98% of Egyptian voters, in my view at least, are eager to sell their vote because they understand perfectly the prevailing voting system in Egypt over the last 60 and more years. Voting in Egypt, elections in Egypt are a festival where everybody tries to grab whatever is to be grabbed. They know for sure that if they have, say, 20 candidates in their circumscription, the 19 that are going to lose, they will never see them again. And they also know that the one who's going to win, they also will never see him again. Henceforth, let's grab what we can grab as a community. Let it be a new school, a class in an old school, a minaret for a mosque that doesn't have such a minaret, or in a case I lived myself, a car to transport the dead because a village didn't have such a car. And then, no harm if on election day I can get some cash in my hand for me, not for the community, and that's why most Egyptian voters would love to have such a festival every year, if not every month. Another issue that was raised was the impact of January 2011 on Egyptians. And I would like to concretize what was said in a proper terminology. What happened is that a large chunk of the Egyptian population understood that they were citizens and no more subjects. And that has made a tremendous difference. Finally, an issue, a term was raised, has been circled around, which is a very important term in my mind, is decentralization. La مركزية. I am a very strong believer that when the youngsters went to Tahrir, claiming that they wanted to change the system, they didn't want to get rid of President Mubarak. They wanted to get rid of the pharaonic pyramidal system that has been controlling this country, at least for the last 6,000 years. And I believe that the solution for Egypt is to move from this pyramidal, God inspired system of a pharaoh who knows everything, who has to dulge and who has to instruct so that everything happens, onto a decentralized system where decisions are taken from the very base, let it be a village or a dwelling or a suburb in a city. As a conclusion to that session, I would unfortunately say that I still believe that we have not addressed the core issue of democracy, at least in Egypt. I unfortunately feel that we have walls around it. It is a fact that we have today in Egypt a military autocracy system. A military autocracy that was voted at a very, very high unanimity, that in my perception was the only solution to the predicament the country was in. However, we are moving or maintaining the very, very damaging concept of the trustworthy versus the knowledgeable. And that is the problem that needs to be addressed. And to be very fair, I have to say that in view of the depleted political, civil, or secular scene in Egypt that is plagued by a series of megalomaniac buffoons, I cannot blame the decision maker to prefer the trustworthy to those who claim that they are knowledgeable and, in fact, cannot be of an addition to the exercise of solving a problem, a country that is in a quagmire of economic, social, political problems. I took a lot of time as far as this session is concerned. As far as the other session, I have two words. It reminds me of the say of this gentleman who went to China and gave a very long speech, and he spoke for 15 minutes, and then the translator said, "Cha." And he looked at him and, yes, go on. Another 15 minutes, "Cha." Final 15 minutes, he said, "Cha, cho." And when they asked what did cha and cho mean, cha meant BS. Cha, cho meant that BS was over. I'm sorry, I didn't mean that about this. I'm just saying that this session on extremism has been very actively followed by the audience. I will put in my report what was in it, but I don't have the time but to say cha and cho. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dr. for your excellent and very interesting snitching, as you said. Now, الآن ننتقل إلى متحدثين من مكتبة الإسكندرية. وأنا الحقيقة أشعر باحترام شديد لكل من يعمل في هذا الصرح العظيم في مصر. هؤلاء هم تلاميذ إسماعيل سراج الدين، هؤلاء هم الجنود المجهولون أو المعروفون الذين يساهمون في هذا الأداء الراقي لهذه المؤسسة العظيمة. وإن كنا سوف نكون يعني قاسيين معهم في موضوع الوقت. ما هي المقدمة بالضبط. فأرجوكم الالتزام بالوقت، وأنتم بقى من أبناء الدار. فأبدأ بالأخ العزيز الدكتور سامح فوزي.
شكرا دكتور أسامة. Good morning. My report will focus on the session on political parties in Egypt. I will try to be brief as much as I can. The session was dedicated to the discussions of political parties in Egypt, and our distinguished speakers departed from different ideological positions. They focused on the whole political system in general, but they tackled the problems of political parties in particular. In my report, I don't want to repeat what they said or even summarize parts of their presentations, but I will try to introduce an analytical framework containing their content and their presentations in a way that we can come up with certain conclusions. My report will discuss three major points. The first one is the definition of political parties, as our speakers perceived. The second is approaches to the problems of political parties, and the third point is prospects for future or futuristic view about political parties in Egypt. First, the definition of political party. In its simplest, political party mean a group of people who come from different geographical, professional, educational backgrounds and share an ideology or certain political beliefs. In a way, they would like to impact public policies in society or come to power. They represent people, their interests. Also, they try to have a say in policy making and policy implementation in society. But according to such a definition, we have some problems in terms of the way political parties in Egypt handle its functions. According to such a definition, we have a very blurring image about political parties in Egypt. Our distinguished speakers and also our participants mentioned to some critical points concerning the existence and the definition of political parties itself. Like we have more than 100 political parties in Egypt, but people cannot memorize their names, or they don't know their own ideologies or their goals, the composition, the ideological framework of such parties, their role in society. In such a case, our speakers raise some important and legitimate questions. What is the future of a political party which could not win even a seat in the parliament? What's the future of a political party which is totally unknown or unpopular at grassroots level? What's the future of political party which doesn't have a sharp ideological framework? What is the future of the political party which is totally distracting for the young generation? Also, what's the future of the political party which is still reluctant to have a particular place in political spectrum, either among opposition or loyalists, but still in such swing position? I will try also to mention to an important issue raised yesterday about the role of the political parties. If political party doesn't function well at the national level, what is the role of parties at local level? I will move to the second point, which focus on different approaches to the current problems of the political parties in Egypt. The first one is this historical approach, which focus on the origins and the establishment of the political parties, ups and downs happened to the party system in Egypt throughout the history, and try to come up with certain explanation of the current problems of the political parties based on historical assessment of the existence of a party system in Egypt. The second approach is a structural approach, which is based on inward, internal problems of political parties, like the lack of resources, the authoritarian culture within party system and within political parties, patron-client relationship, the lack of political activism, the lack of young generation working within political parties, also the lack of ideological framework which can help people place themselves right in right positions in society. Also, when we study the structural approach to the problems of political party, we focus also on the environment in which political parties function. We mentioned to the relationship between primordial ties and the political parties. We always remember that political parties is a part of civil society, and civil society is in intermediary positions between government and primordial ties. Primordial ties are quite stronger in Egyptian society. Family and the religious communities are more stronger than political parties. We realize it in every public positions. We realize it in public elections, and it's quite clear. The second element is government. Some of our distinguished speakers is speaking about a restrictive environment in which political parties work in. They mentioned too the political parties law, which impose some restrictions on the ability of certain groups to form their own parties, like marginalized groups and young generations, etc. Also, when we mention to the environment in which political parties working in, we refer to the whole political system and some restrictions on the political movement in society, and also mention to the withdrawal of the young generation from the political spectrum. We move to the third approach, which also try to explain the problems of political parties by introducing socioeconomic explanations. We heard yesterday a talk on poverty, marginalizations, but also some of our speakers mentioned to the cultural problems are more than economic problems. But it will still a debate in Egyptian society which factors come first, cultural or economic. I will move to future. I will try to introduce some points. I could extract it from the discussions yesterday, from the speakers' presentations, and also from the discussions. Number one, the political system itself should get open. And there are certain demands are quite important at this moment. Transitional justice law and the demonstration law, and others is speaking about how we can democratize the political environment in Egypt to be more attractive to younger generation, for more political engagement, and also for more political dialogue on how we can come up with certain solutions to overcome socioeconomic and political problems in Egypt. That's the first one. Second, innovation is quite important. We all are invited to introduce innovative ideas, but political parties, because they are vehicles and the engines for democracy in society, are invited to introduce innovative solutions to certain problems. In such a case, we have to mention that classical, archaic political discussions are not welcomed at all right now, like the discussion over poverty from strict ideological position. Now people have to move away from such classical political discussions and try to introduce innovative ideas based on development, investment, and another ideas or how we can make effective public policies in society. Number three, party system law should be changed. Proportional list system should be adopted to enable marginalized groups and younger generations in particular who cannot compete on individual basis in different constituencies. Number three, media. Media is important to give a chance for marginalized voices to be heard. Unfortunately, we have a very difficult positions for media in Egypt. Media owned by government or owned by business persons who, at the same time, have their own political apparatus or have their own political tool in society, which is a political party. Now we have to think deeply if we would like to democratize the society, if we would like to widen the spectrum of democracy in Egypt, that we have to make a media that can reflect the diversity of opinions in society and they make every single voice to be heard in Egypt. Number 4, we have to acknowledge that now we have a parliament, whatever our criticism. We have a parliament, the overwhelming majority of the members are independents. Political parties are weak, and they can get weaker if they don't do their job effectively in the new parliament. People hold expectations on the new parliament or the newly elected parliament that if political parties perform well, it means that people can restore their confidence in the whole political process and become more engaged in politics once more, or people will become more distracted from politics and we will face a very difficult position at this moment. Thank you.
شكرا سامح. ننتقل الآن إلى الكادر الثاني. الكادر الثاني من كوادر مكتبة الإسكندرية الأستاذة نهى عمر. تفضلي.
Good morning. I'm presenting 2 sessions. The first session, it's framing the issue. It was shared by Professor Hans van Ginkel and with Dr. Ismail Sirageddin, Professor Alexander Likotal, Dr. Anna Luhrmann, and Dr. Gary Jacobs as speakers. The session aimed to explore the role of the existing democracies from a historical, political, and academic perspectives. It aims to address the various forms of actual and existing electoral systems. It highlighted the positive features of the existing democratic system in the United States and Europe and in the emerging democracies. It underlined the shortcomings that need to be addressed in the new democratic systems. The session started by Dr. Sirageddin, and in his presentation he highlighted that this is a real anniversary for the democracy, as we are at 900 years since the Magna Carta, and on the 10th it was the anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. He then gave an overview of all the milestones of democracy in the eastern part of the world, starting with El Medina Constitution, the Pact of Omar, passing by the letter Omar ibn al-Khattab sent to Al-Qadi Abu Musa al-Ash'ari, and the fluorescence of the non-Muslim scientists during the rule of the Arab in Andalusia. Then he gave a quick overview on the history of democracy in Egypt by Majlis, starting also by Majlis Shura Nuwab in 1866, then the Constitution of 1923, the Revolution of 1952, the Constitution of 71 and its amendments, and the Constitutions of 2012 and 2014. Dr. Sirageddin passed through the different system of democratic and passed through the history of different system of democracy and elections across the world, by the Athenian lottery system, the Renaissance Republic in Italy, the British Revolution, the British Bill of Rights, the American Declaration of Independence, in which Thomas Jefferson scratched out the fellow subjects and replaced it by the word citizens, the Constitution of the United States, the French Revolution with its Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen in 1789, and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948. He explained that the path to democracy started long ago with different approaches and systems, and all over the world. Therefore, we have to pursue this in proper means to implement and to create a new democratic system that would be more adaptable to our time and conditions. He said also that by the beginning of the 21st century, the democracy was gaining everywhere, yet there are important steps towards democracy nowadays. Granting fundamental rights for citizens, clear social contract between government and governed, the separation of power is very important, the legitimacy of the government course from the consent of governed, they represent the voice of people through elected government, the expansion of the right of voting. We want freedom, justice, and equality, and we believe democracy will deliver this, he said. On the other hand, here is the question of how can we move from where we are with the Latin American experience as example. And he said that in 1980s, the Latin American countries transformed from military dictatorship to democracy, he gave the examples also of China and Singapore as alternative models. He insisted on the importance of creating a transparent and adaptable democratic system, the importance of the charismatic leaders with vision, and he mentioned President Tutu, President Mandela, and President Obasanjo as examples. Moreover, Dr. Sirajuddin highlighted the current problem that we are facing, that are the alienation of citizens, the representation effectiveness, the low participation, and low membership in parties, the money and corruption, and the polarization. People feel they do not have proper means to express themselves, said Sirajuddin. They don't feel that their elected representatives do this for them, and as a result, they reclaim the streets. Therefore, we need to move from the representative democracy to participatory democracy. And to do this, we need the NGOs, as they are powerful agents for changes. He added that there is no rational decision possible by any system of voting. Hence, the criteria for social choices being equity, utility, and entitlement, at a certain time, the society give an age on one to the other. He concluded saying, we have to be bold, to dare to dream, because the current century is a dawn of a new age. We have a new generation that is totally connected, who thinks differently. We have to learn to collaborate with pluralism for the future generation and for the world. Then Professor Alexander Likotal started his talk by asking a very important question. What is the issue? According to Professor Likotar, the issue is that 2 years ago, democracy was the most important and successful idea. However, it started to face various problems and challenges. What changed the democratic perspective? Democracy is not only how people live, following Professor Likotal, but rather what they live for. It is about values. Nowadays, the human development become hostage of economic performance, and democracy is essentially dominated by economy, liberal values that have degenerated, basic rights that are now absent are proof that all standards of prosperity are at some point threatened. In 10 or 14 years, the world will be a very different place because of the rapid development in technology. We have to find a way to think the democracy with globalization, said Professor Likotal. We have to formulate a new self-adaptable system and to create a global citizen within national grounds. We need a new political vision. A democracy will not die. It is only evolving, and it is much stronger than it appears. Democracy is not thus limited to economic issues. Then we had Professor Anna Luhrmann, who said that by looking at the different types of electoral system in the West, one realized that there is no such thing as a single Western notion of democracy. Thus, democracy can be adapted to different parts of the world. She mentioned the different electoral system in established democracy, the majoritarian, the proportional, and the mixed electoral system with the disadvantage and advantage, like the number for the majoritarian system, the disadvantage like number of votes lost, the system is prone to manipulation. However, it has some advantages, like it ends up by very clear blocks at the parliament. The system results in having two parties, and she gave the example of the US and the United Kingdom. As for the proportional system, it is a very complicated system. It can be weighed down by the fact that it is a more inclusive system, yet it is a better and more just representative of the people. Those who vote for small parties find themselves represented in the parliament. She read the question of which one is the best selection system and confirmed that there is no best selection system. It depends on the local content. She also assured that the great essence of democracy is the rule certainty and the outcome uncertainty. And that is, if there is an agreement between people, and people will accept the government and the turnover. She also said that we have to pay great attention to the quality of the election process. How free is the election? How do defeated parties accept the results? The magic of democracy is that the defeated accept the loss, she said. The 2 points are very much related to each other, as the loser is much more likely to accept defeat if the elections are free and fair, not only in vote counting, the fairness and the free elections, but also being free and fair through the election, all the election process. In these criteria, if these criteria are fulfilled, the magic of democracy can work. Nevertheless, there are some problems facing election. The first is how to finance political party. We have some answer to this, establishing clear-cut rules and regulation concerning how to finance political party. And we can use the case of Germany. There can be a state mechanism through which weaker political parties get some funds to run election campaigns. The second problem is the performance of elected leaders, and they have interest to perform well because this performance is highly reflected on the level of development. The third problem is the participation of citizens in between elections. She concluded by saying democracy is not limited to election, but at the same time, there is no democracy without free and fair election. Free and fair elections can ensure that the desire for change can find some peaceful outlet if they allow reform and the selection of new leaders. True democracies are open for criticism and reform and are able to adapt to new challenges. We pass now to Professor Jerry Jacobs. He agreed with Professor Licotal that the democracy is an evolving process. He gave an overview on the experience of the United States with the issuing of the Declaration of Independence, with half the signatory of this declaration were slave owners, and then he talked about the Civil War, then America's passed by the constitutional amendments and the abolishing of slavery. And Professor Jacobs said that people often question the authority of the government. It may have been a democracy, and he gave the case of the American citizen youth during the Vietnam War. The authority of government, it may have been democracy, and even though the government have been elected, the question is whether this government represents the people and represents the principle on which the country is intended to be based. Definitely democracy, when you see it operating, looks differently than theory, than books. This is what Professor Jacobs said. And he gave the example of India, where the voting goes by caste lines and votes are paid or offered TV or other incentives to vote along certain lines. His narrative reinforced what Professor Licotal said. In a country that many look to as the icon of democracy, democracy is a work in progress. He talked here, he was mentioning the United States. He added that we have to look at democracy not as a model of success or failure. We have to look at it as a challenge we face at governing our increasingly complex, interconnected human community. What are we trying to accomplish? He also agreed once again with Professor Licotal that democracy seems to be the most successful, effective system devised in order to generate wealth and stability for people over a long period of time, that it is a tremendous accomplishment. What is the problem? We humans live together in countries which have tremendous potential, knowledge, skills, and we created all the peace, the wealth through networks. We get people to work together, live together for individual and collective benefits. And we somehow balance between the individual and collective rights. When we highlight this value, we realize more energy, more potential, and we realize democracy. However, there is another power. It is the power process, another process to consider. It is the process that determines how this social potential and social benefits are distributed in society. Who gets what? The way power is distributed in society is not necessarily determined by electoral process. Extending the mechanism of democracy without the foundation of culture of liberalism can create the illiberal democracy, which can have an opposite effect on the US is encouraging the illiberal democracy. The real issue is not how we get the mechanism right, but how do we promote the culture of development that is going to use the power that modern society has in a way to be beneficial to all. This was for the first session.
شكرا جزيلا.
The second session.
يعني احنا الوقت
The second session.
We're constrained by time, and I got very strict guidelines from the boss, and especially that we are in a conference on democracy, and so it is the right of everyone to express their opinions and to criticize. Of course, this is the right given, and they are given 2 minutes. So in these 2 minutes, you can say whatever you want. From people from the floor, the audience. Thank you, sir. This is a great effort like the past days, and I have only one remark. I do not understand why the session on religion and terrorism and extremism was postponed, or it was cancelled. I don't know. Was it covered? And I want to assure that many of the speakers always pointed out youth, not many pointed out to women, and that's why I said that women have to be in the reports, and I am sorry that we were left till the end of a session and we do not get to hear about the summary of the sessions. No, we are constrained by time, and Dr. Sarageddin has an answer, has a reply for this. The issue of time is that we had to postpone this session till today. And so we need to keep to the time, or else we will go over time. But Noha, I believe, was about to talk about the session that would have answered Ms. Farida's question.
3 points, 2 minutes. Point number 1, Cha. Okay. Point number 2, Cho, and one more point. I think this is about democracy in the 21st century. And I'm not the first one who says that we live in a bizarre time, which is a combination of Stone Age emotions, medieval age beliefs, and almost godlike technologies. We mentioned a lot of things, and there were a lot of things devoted to technology and the role of technology. I didn't hear, maybe I was not so careful, but I think that we have to emphasize, at least open the issue of new ICT and democracy and technologies in general, because that's one of the things that will happen to us anyway. Since we agreed yesterday, practically, that we can, with new technology, very easily have decision-making governance and democracy in which everyone has opinion about everything and you just sum it up. And everyone agrees that that's not the way we should do it. But we do it or not do it, it may happen. Especially because today, in Europe, I will just say, stay for Europe. I'm not saying for states or for some other countries. Some people are saying that Europe or European countries are not run by leaders, but by polls. And tomorrow, technology will provide us that we will have, if we don't want decision-making by everyone, politicians will have polls immediately on whatever they want. So they will be run by polls because of technology. So I'm just think that we should put some, let's say, topic about it, or at least to say that there is something which matters to 21st century democracy, and we have to be aware of that thing. So as someone said, the whole problem with the world is that fools and fanatics are always so certain of themselves and wise people so full of doubts. I think that we should close some doubts, or at least say that we understand that they exist and we'll deal with them, because fools and fanatics may take over and then we can forget about democracy, which I hope it won't happen in 21st century, right? That's the overall idea. So, oh yes, I have one more point. Sorry. Cha. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, yes. Any other comment? So it is okay now? and we shall move to the second election, no? Thank you. Thank you too much.